Today's video is about the intriguing but somewhat sensitive subject of death anxiety, also called thanatophobia. We all know death is a subject that we can't avoid forever, and naturally we all fear it, but most of us somehow manage to put it at the back of our minds. But for some people, the worry becomes all-consuming and stops them from truly living. Their thoughts are constantly about their own mortality, and this brings crippling anxiety and even physical symptoms that just makes them worry even more. So in this video, I'm going to look at why some people suffer thanatophobia and what they can do to manage this dark and depressing phobia. Quite early in childhood, we start to become aware of death, but it is usually around 9 or 10 that we begin to grasp the concept of our own mortality, which can be quite distressing for a child. As we approach middle age, we become even more aware of death as we lose friends, family, or just people we know. As we get older, the frequency of reminders about our own mortality increases, so you would think that the fear of death is much stronger in older people. But you may be surprised to hear that research suggests otherwise. A study involving adults and their elderly parents who were not terminally ill showed that the children had greater anxiety about death than their parents, as demonstrated by their scores on something called the Templer's Death Anxiety Scale. This surprising statistic may give us some insight into why some people have crippling anxiety about death, whereas most people are able to fully function despite the knowledge of their own mortality. But before we go deeper into this, let's have a look at some risk factors that may underlie or trigger thanatophobia. Poor health, dissatisfaction, low self-esteem, and traumatic experiences are just some of the elements that can lead to thanatophobia. Also, thanatophobia is often closely linked to an anxiety disorder. People with generalized anxiety disorder often have an intolerance of uncertainty, and nothing is more uncertain than death. People with health anxiety are constantly worrying about getting ill, so it's not surprising that they may also suffer from death anxiety. Like any phobia, the flood of distressing, catastrophic thoughts that thanatophobia brings can cause some extreme physical reactions, like heart palpitations, shaking, upset stomach, sweating, and shortness of breath. And these symptoms make the anxiety even worse. So what can you do to stop this excessive worrying about something that none of us can avoid? If you have felt like this for over 6 months and it's affecting your quality of life, then it's important to get help from a therapist. The most commonly used and successful therapy for phobias and anxiety disorders is cognitive behavioral therapy. In CBT, you learn about the intrinsic relationship between maladaptive beliefs, behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and physical symptoms. A therapist will help you understand which beliefs are driving your anxiety. With thanatophobia, beliefs may be linked to the dying process, or about the unfairness of death, the timing of death, how your loved ones will cope after you have gone, or the uncertainty of what happens after death. On that last point, I'm sure this video will have lots of comments from people who take comfort from their faith. But research has shown that although some people have lower anxiety about death due to their religious beliefs, others actually experience more. A crucial aspect of CBT is modifying your behaviors, as certain behaviors can fuel anxiety. Some people avoid discussing or even acknowledging death, while others dive too deeply into it in a futile attempt to protect themselves from every conceivable cause of death. With the latter, a gradual reduction in these reassurance-seeking behaviors will reduce the anxiety, and in the case of avoidance, a therapist may use exposure therapy, which may just involve writing about death, reading obituaries, or making a will. This is because, as with all phobias, the more we try to avoid something, the more we fear it. And this takes us back to the elderly people in the research paper I mentioned earlier. Despite their age, their anxiety was lower than their children's. That is probably because through their life they have experienced death significantly more and come to accept it as part of life. When we try to fight or avoid the inevitable, it just makes us anxious and unhappy. By learning to accept our mortality, we can free ourselves of the anxiety that it brings. And while everyone is likely to experience fear, apprehension, and uncertainty at the end, acceptance will allow us to reflect on the wonderful gift that we have had, the gift of life.